Now we come to the toxicity and abuse of these. Both are extremely addictive because of the intense high that it gives users, increasing the feelings of pleasure, helping users stay alert and focused. And so the negative effects on the body will be cocaine can cause damage in organs when used, and extreme use can result in anxiety attacks, panic attacks, even hallucinations, and paranoia when used in large amounts or over large periods of time. Meth can do similar things, however, it has a much more detrimental effect on the body because it will impact the central nervous system, it will increase the heart rate, and it will really very quickly deteriorate the body with use as it stops users from being hungry. It can make them feel like they have everything they need when the body is actually starving or in dire need of food and water and other things, while stopping the body from telling you these things. So cocaine versus meth can be seen just in the half-life of the drug. So the time it takes from entering the body to be decreased to 50%. In cocaine, it's 1 hour, whereas in meth, it's 12 hours. And also about meth, many of the overdoses and deaths caused by this are contributed to physical symptoms such as heart attacks or lung failure instead of the actual use of that, because it really affects many physical parts of the body. And these are often labeled as physical as deaths due to those instead of an actual meth overdose, which it basically is the cause of. Hallucinogenics is the next category. So we'll talk about LSD and marijuana. However, there are many different types of hallucinogenics. We'll focus on those two. History of LSD. So this was actually used by ancient Romans for cultures and religious ceremonies. We have heard about in ancient, like maybe some shamans, many leaders, pharaohs and kings would pay someone such as this, who was deemed as a prophet or could see into the future. He would then ingest some type of hallucinogenic, perhaps LSD or mushrooms, and have some hallucinations and tell those people what he saw, which they would believe to be true and as a prophetic sign. So it's been used for a long time in the form of magic mushrooms or other natural substances which contain what LSD is made from. So LSD, which is the very condensed form of this hallucinogenic substance, was first discovered by Hoffman, who was working for a pharmaceutical company. He created the LSD tab, which is a tiny little, much smaller than a pill, like a little paper thing is tinier than your fingernail, which contains very hallucinogenic properties. He accidentally ingested this and had a long trip, which it seemed that he enjoyed, and as the story goes, he got his lab assistant to do it with him, and that was basically Hey, buddy, look what I invented. Gotta try it with me. That's the story of how it was produced in a lab for the first time in the form of LSD, which we know now. And just like these other substances, in the early 1900s, the government began the huge anti-propaganda against them. Scare stories began to appear on the news, and they were viewed as a threat within 1970 region, making it illegal to use any hallucinogenic substance. And many psychologists and doctors thought that, well, before it was made illegal, they were discovering some amazing things it could do to the brain. It was used in small amounts to treat depression. It would open different parts of the brain to open the mind to even a new dimension. So it was just beginning to be researched when it was made illegal. And many people are sad about that, saying, imagine what we would know now had for these 30 years been able to study these without it being illegal. Depression, anxiety, addiction, consciousness, how the mind works are all things that are impacted by these hallucinogenics. So now we are starting to discover more and more of what these substances actually do in the brain, and hopefully and actually be able to use them medicinally to treat many mental illnesses that otherwise we have no ways to treat. So how it works, depending on the dose, scientists haven't exactly narrowed it down to exactly how hallucinogenics work, though they've isolated it to be in the 5-HT2A receptor, working as an agonist, so it will increase the neurotransmitters in that area of the brain. They believe that area of the brain is involved in the subconscious. It will open new doors, even called a portal. However, it also binds to some serotonin, dopamine, and adrenergic receptors. So adrenaline is involved, dopamine, and so it also creates a feeling of euphoria when used. It's considered to be non-toxic and safe in its physical properties. However, the dangers, so it's considered to be physically safe, and no one has ever been killed from actually using LSD or mushrooms. However, the main dangers rely in its psychological effects on the body. Many people have used it, and perhaps because LSD is a very potent substance, very densely compact form of these hallucinogenic chemicals, and so it can cause people to go into a never-ending nightmare where minutes can feel like hours, and even after going through this psychological nightmare or trip, we've had people develop PTSD or other mental effects that can even last for years after the initial use. So while there's no physical danger, there's a huge psychological effect of this substance. So it should really be done in an area, a safe environment with positive things around you, because one little thought is believed to be able to lead to just insane trip or nightmares even. So it has potential to be used as a miraculous drug, or if used in the wrong environment or context, it can be scary. Marijuana, here we go. So the first use of marijuana that we know of was in 2737 BC by Emperor Shennong of China. And since that, he used the plant as medicine, as it is very healing for the body. It can act as a natural anesthetic. And since then, we've seen historically many Asian countries have used it in soups, in foods, as medicine, as treatment. So it wasn't until the 1700s, or actually when Christopher Columbus came to the Americas, where it was not very oftenly used. However, it was used medicinally in Western countries from its discovery. However, it wasn't until the early 1900s, along with what I talked about previously, where the man behind this very anti-substance propaganda was named Harry Anslinger. And he began to push this quite ridiculous and preposterous propaganda against these, saying marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. It causes Negroes to want to have sexual intercourse with white women. And he even said things such as that on the news, which started the anti-marijuana, all these substances propaganda, eventually leading to its illegalization. And at this time, there was only one person who spoke out against it, which was Woodward of the American Medical Association, who said there is no evidence that it's dangerous, and we shouldn't illegalize this substance that could potentially have many medicinal helpful ways to help us. And so he was the only voice to speak out against it, despite alongside this relentless, unscientific, just anti-propaganda, which made it illegal. So how it works? So THC is the main psychoactive component in marijuana. So by itself, it's not actually has effects as a drug, but it's when it's heated, like smoked or some form of cooking, which make it into an edible form, which make it psychoactive, and it can work as an anesthetic in many cases. It can make users feel relaxed. It can increase euphoria. It can cause a heightened sensitivity to certain things, which create more enjoyment for users. And so it works on the cannabinoid receptors in the brain, CB1 and CB2. So it will generate a response from these receptors. And we don't know specifically how it does so, but it does produce many medicinal and beneficial effects. So toxicity and abuse. Is it dangerous? Consuming large amounts may lead to psychotic episodes, but it won't directly cause death. So there's not been any cases where marijuana actually leads to death. However, it's just very similar to smoking. It's the long-term use that is dangerous, because after doing anything a long time, it can develop problems. For smoking weed, it can cause chronic bronchitis. It can even cause lung cancer. I mean, smoking anything can do so. And compared to alcohol, where 5 to 6% of users develop an addiction to, only about 3% of marijuana users grow addicted. And that is not even a physical addiction. It's a psychological addiction. Instead of the body growing reliant on marijuana, it's natural, and when stopping, there's no physical withdrawal as we see in other substances like caffeine and alcohol. Instead, it's more of a psychological want for more, because doing anything, our brain develops it adapts to it and gets used to it and expects there to be more. So psychologically, we will become addicted to this after use. Psychotherapeutics. So these are antidepressants, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers. So 3 different categories right here. So antidepressants are not the same as depressants. They are much lower in potency. For example, Xanax and other of these drugs. So it wasn't until use in the 1950s, when people with mental illnesses, this was a time where they were thrown into a mental institution, and there were horrible things that were done to treat these mental illnesses, such as electroshock therapy, and even lobotomies, where they would screw into a part of the brain trying to cure these people. However, in the 1950s, they discovered these antidepressant medications and began to use them to treat them, finding, wow, they work to help so many disorders such as epilepsy, depression, anxiety. And over the course of years, as with every substance, we've learned more and more about these, to its use now as its SSRIs, which are selective serotonin releasing antidepressants, are now account for 70% of the prescriptions in the US for this category. So how they work, these are used to treat anxiety and depression for the most common uses, and there are 4 main types, which all affect either serotonin, which is involved in mood and sleep. It's involved in sadness as well. So many of these will act as indirect agonists. They will block the transmitters, the receptors. So inside the synaptic cleft, the ones in there will continue to work. And it does this by both stopping the serotonin intake. So serotonin is involved in sadness. So there's 3 monoamine neurotransmitters that antidepressants affect directly. These are dopamine, which is pleasure, joy, as you know; norepinephrine, which is involved in energy, attention, and it's also linked to becoming angry and some emotions; and then serotonins, which regulate mood, sleep, and sadness. So antidepressants work by increasing dopamine as well as decreasing norepinephrine and serotonins, which will reduce anxiety and fear in using them. So the dangers of antidepressants are not very related to the substance actually being toxic or potent. However, it's due to many users go to these substances to treat suicidal desires or depression. And these substances take even up to 2 weeks of using them for it to actually be absorbed and activated by the body. So when first prescribed, users who are depressed or suicidal even will expect to be relieved. However, initially they won't be, as it will take a longer time for them to take effect, and it can initially increase those symptoms. However, it's almost impossible to kill a person just from overdosing on one of these substances. Serotonin syndrome is one main cause of death, but it is very rare, and usually when mixed with other substances is when it might be dangerous. Then we have antipsychotics. So as I said before, 1950s, doctors performed lobotomies, electric shock therapy to treat schizophrenia and many mental illnesses. And thorazine was first discovered in 1876, and in the 1950s, doctors started to clinically test and use many of these substances to treat many of these mental disorders. And how it works, so these actually increase the dopamine neurotransmitters flow into the brain. It can help in increasing the happiness of users, and there are actually no very lethal dangers of this one. And then we come to what's called a mood stabilizer, lithium. So it's been around since the 1940s, where it was begun to treat bipolar disorder, and it's still used used currently to treat that. It has been shown to reduce suicides drastically, and in 1940s, people in America were ingesting lithium in several products, as it's been infused in many different products. However, in high quantities, this can be very dangerous because it only needs a small bit of maybe 300 milligrams or up to 1,000 milligrams a day to have its beneficial effects. However, more than that can start to have problems. However, there's not tons of studies done on it currently to know, but many consider it as the true brain food. So it will actually increase activity in some parts of the brain and help. But its real dangers come from mixing it or using too much of it. So studies have actually showed that in areas where lithium is put into the water, there is a lower rate of homicides and suicides than in areas without lithium in the water. This has been shown in studies on a global scale, in fact. So one thing it actually does, it increases brain volume in the hippocampus and other parts of the brain. So that is all. I hope you learned something and are able to use this information. Thank you for watching. Toodaloo!